say that I feel very underqualified to speak in front of you all. So I have no experience of rewilding. But I was really, like, I was really quite excited when Michael got in touch with. I think there's huge potential. And as a statistician who's kind of worked with ecologists for many years, I know that it's a really exciting thing to be involved with. So I'm probably going to go back to like a Stats 101 lecture now. So I saw Johan's slide and I really, really enjoyed your presentation today. I feel like I've clarified an awful lot in my mind, which I've been quite confused about while reading the literature.
Thank you.
So if I can have the next slide, please. I'm sure that all of you who have done your stats lectures know all about the research cycle. So I'm not here just to bore you for 5 minutes, but what I was trying to do when I was thinking about rewilding and how we might be able to approach this from a sort of statistical and mathematical point of view is really think about where it would be most valuable for us to contribute. Now, this is probably really overly simplistic, and I'm really wanting lots of criticism for this, because I think if I can get this right in my mind, and if we can actually come up with a framework that rewilding fits into, I think it's the key to kind of take the next steps. So the way I'm viewing this is that there's a kind of input here, that there's some sort of motivation for a particular area to be rewilded. And as we keep hearing, and as I thankfully took from Johan's slides, it's all focused on ecosystem function. So there's some, I think, lots of elements here. There's expertise coming from lots of different areas. And I'm trying to get that across by this kind of expert transdisciplinary knowledge really feeding into all parts of this cycle. So once an area has been identified and it's been decided what sort of function is particularly focused on, obviously there's going to be lots of different potential strategies for achieving that function. So in this case of development of potential strategies, again, there's lots of different disciplines that need to feed into that. And then being a statistician, well, I'd say, well, if there's lots of potential different strategies, how do we actually evaluate those different strategies? And I think this is where the kind of mathematical and statistical modelling could really help. Once, of course, you come up with different evaluation of those strategies, you've got to come up with a plan, because it's unlikely that you're going to be able to implement them all. So you're going to have to select a particular route for a particular problem. And it's only sort of quite a way round this cycle that we're really going to think, you know, has the rewilding happened? And as I'll go on to talk about a little bit later, I've been involved with some reintroduction work, and I want to sort of discuss this with Johan afterwards about how reintroduction and what reintroduction's done. Obviously, that's partly restoring, but some of those mechanisms of putting species into an area, I think there is lots to be learned for the potential for rewilding as well. And then an aspect that I'm particularly interested in is how much monitoring or how much evaluation is there after rewilding's been done to actually determine if it's been a success. Because if we're actually going to contribute to the literature on rewilding, surely we've got to learn about what's worked well and what's worked badly. And then hopefully that insight can sort of feed back into future projects. So as I say, very overly simplistic. I'm not an ecologist, please don't rip me apart, but I'd be really keen to discuss that further. Next slide, please, Jake. Okay, so the bits I've highlighted in red are the bits where I feel, certainly as a statistician, I would feel most comfortably placing myself. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to break it into two. So I'm going to think about the evaluation of strategies and coming up with plans. And as Sergei has talked about, if it's possible to develop a mathematical or statistical, I think we can argue at a later stage, should it be one or the other, should it be some amalgamation of both? If it's possible to come up with that general framework, it should be possible to come up with sort of a way of simulating or evaluating those potential different strategies to be able to provide some evidence of which route should be taken. So I see this as very much, okay, we'd have a mathematical formulation, but can we get some data to inform that evaluation of strategy? And I think there's an acceptance, certainly within the statistical community, and I'm certainly seeing it more in the conservation literature, the value of potential expert elicitation. There's going to be a huge number of experts in all sorts of different fields that really could strategically feed into some of this decision making. And also there might be historical data. So are there examples of other reintroductions or other rewilding that can be used to inform next strategies? Next slide, please. Then we've got to think about what do we do afterwards. And one thing that I don't know if it's done in practice or whether once a rewilding strategy has been chosen, but is it possible that a rewilding happens and then they look at it and think, oh, that's not working brilliantly. Do they then go on to do something else? So is there currently this, what I would refer to as a sort of feedback loop of let's evaluate how things are going. Could we be doing something extra to make this work better? So I see this as what the purpose of a rewilding, I'm calling it surveillance, it could be monitoring. I'm sort of using them interchangeably here. But do we need to really think about how we do that post-rewilding monitoring? So as I've said, I've been involved with Katie's work, Amanda's work with reintroduction. And it's been complex enough to determine appropriate sampling and surveying strategies for single species reintroductions. And I'm thinking here, this is even more complex because this is not just about looking at how successful the sort of translocation of a particular species has been. It's also about what impact it's had on the ecosystem and whether it's actually achieved that ecosystem function. How measurable is that ecosystem function? And then what we want to see of whether we can determine whether rewilding has been a success. Do we need to see different things evolve over time? Because this isn't just a yes or no answer, I'm assuming, if an area has been rewilded. Has it managed to sustain that ecosystem function, or has that ecosystem function further evolved? And therefore, does the monitoring post-rewilding also need to evolve? And just a note, this is my caveat, that this is going to be really difficult. I mean, I know mathematicians and statisticians really like a challenge and we really like complex things. But ecosystem level statistical modelling, there's not a lot of it out there. And there's a reason for that. It's really hard. But I think it's really exciting that we can really think about where multi-species work's being done, where sort of certain biodiversity. I think the biodiversity literature is really somewhere that we can learn from. What we can learn from what's been done in certain areas to really be a useful starting point methodologically for this project. And importantly, being a statistician, there's no point us developing cool statistical models if no one's going to use them. So I'd really like to see a kind of translational element in the work that we do, so that we can really link what we've learned from the rewilding to actually provide insight for others to use. Next slide, please, Jay. So you'll see that this, I'm rather obsessed with this cycle. But really on the final slide, I just want to really kind of highlight this importance of transdisciplinary. And actually, many of the people online, I think, we were involved with a previous ICMS workshop last summer, and that was all focusing on developing new transdisciplinary projects. And it's been really interesting. So that was bringing together computer scientists, expertise in machine learning, expertise in artificial intelligence, ecologists, statisticians, mathematicians, to really think about how we can best answer ecological questions. And so I see this as wow, this is an opportunity to actually take some of those ideas that we had, but actually put it into practice. So to see such a range of people sat around the table and online is really exciting. And I think that's all I have to say. So thank you very much.